amazing invention invested in World War II. Ever wonder how crazy World War II was? Well, here are some World War II amazing inventions. So crazy, you probably never heard of them before. Welcome to Brainghetti, and kindly subscribe to our channel for more interesting information. Number 5. The Kamikaze Bomb. Kamikaze pilots were a key part of Japan's war strategy, using pilots who deliberately crashed their planes into enemy targets and sacrificed themselves, but they were only as strong as their planes. So the Japanese army decided to give them deadlier weapons. The Yokosuka Mi-7 was the first plane designed for one-way trips, a rocket-piloted, humid, guided flying bomb that would be aimed at aircraft carriers. It was one of the fastest Japanese planes ever designed and delivered a much bigger punch than the standard kamikaze plane. But it sacrificed function for strength because the planes weren't intended to come back. They didn't have the range of other planes, and they needed to be brought near their target by bomber planes, which could then be picked off by American forces before the McQuay 7 could hit its target. When they did hit their target, they did serious damage, but rarely enough to sink major U.S. vessels. They were mostly used in an attempt by the Allies to retake Okinawa, and their impact was minor. The Japanese tried to refine it to make it stronger and more effective, but time ran out after the war ended. The next item struck fear into the enemy, but that's about all it did. Number 4. The Gustav rail cannon. The soldiers defending the French Maginot Line heard a massive rumble, and soon over the hill a monstrosity appears. It's a real cannon, almost impossibly large, 150 feet in length, with a barrel of 100 feet alone. It looks like a metal dinosaur, and it roars like one as well. It fires the heaviest artillery shells around, and its range can hit targets from far larger distances than other guns. This is the Gustav's rail cannon, and its image struck terror into the hearts of the Allies. But the reality was far more complicated. Hitler liked big, menacing weapons and was quickly won over by Gustav's impressive design. The military command was less impressed. Yes, Gustav delivered a powerful punch, but the effort needed to operate it was massive. It needed to be transported in parts and assembled and mounted on site, which took 4,000 soldiers. And it was so expensive to build that the Nazis deployed anti-aircraft units to defend them. It's not a surprise that only a few were ever created. The investment wasn't worth the result, but the Nazis had another weapon that was much smaller but no less deadly. Number 3. The Krumloff curved barrel rifle. In war, you often have seconds to react to an enemy. You turn around the corner and you're met with a barrage of fire that can gun you down before you have time to pull the trigger. But what if there was a way to shoot without turning the corner? The German war machine thought it was possible when they created the Krumloff with an attachment to the stock of a .44 rifle featuring a periscope viewing device with a curved barrel. The goal was to allow soldiers to see and shoot around corners when shielded. The idea was sound, but there were a lot of issues with the final product. The bent barrel attachments underwent enormous stress every time the gun was fired, as the barrel had to withstand the pressure of a speeding bullet as it curved. They would wear out after only 300 rounds, far from ideal for a tense firefight. Even worse, the bullets underwent pressure as well and could shatter, leading them to come out of the barrel in shrapnel, possibly injuring the shooter or their allies. The mirror of the periscope was also vulnerable to fogging. The designers tried to adapt the attachment with shields and vent holes, but ultimately the Krumloff was just crummy. But it was better for the user than this next weapon. Number 2. Mine dogs. One of the most vicious battlefronts of the war was Russia, where German tanks were invading after betraying their former ally. The Russians were suffering heavy casualties and were outgunned by the Nazi superior firepower, so they turned to an unconventional method of anti-tank warfare. There was no shortage of dogs in Russia, and so the army tried to turn them into unique kamikaze weapons. They would hide food under German tanks, strap small explosive to the dog's back, and then send them to trigger their bombs into the tanks. Heck of a way to treat man's best friend. But it wasn't just animal lovers who found problems with the plan. Dogs are living beings, and that means they can be unpredictable. While the basics of the plan worked and even took out a few German tanks, it's impossible to ensure accuracy with animals. Some dogs simply ran off. And worse, some got spooked and ran back to their Russian handlers and detonated the explosives there. but the success rate was enough that the program continued through the war with other countries. Training dogs to Russia even had a program for training bomb-equipped dogs through 1996. It wasn't the only plan to use animals as bombs, but this next one had an unexpected ending. Number 1. Goliath Tracked Mine. Landmines are one of the most feared weapons of war, being buried and waiting for an enemy soldier or a tank to go over them and then blowing them to bits. But what if the mines weren't sitting ducks? What if they could come for the enemy? Research has been ongoing since World War I, as German engineers experimented with small tracked vehicles that could be remote controlled to deliver bombs. Early attempts failed, but later versions were equipped with high explosives of up to 220 pounds and could be sent to target tanks. But there were some major downsides to these new weapons. First, they were single-use devices similar to kamikaze planes, but without the living pilot. Second, remote control technology was still rudimentary, and steering wasn't particularly accurate, meaning the best strategy was simply to aim them and hope for the best. Third, they were expensive to produce, and while over 7,500 were produced, they were too big and unwieldy to be effective weapons. They're an interesting artifact of the war, but armies found it much more effective to stick to traditional mines. Other attempts to replace landmines were much more controversial. What invention do you find interesting? Let us know in the comments section and subscribe to our YouTube channel.